Ireland. So welcome back to my channel. And in this video, I'm going to be asking whether Ukraine is in fact winning this war against Russia. Is Russia losing in its so-called special military operation in Ukraine? I mean, I suppose it's special in as much as it's egregiously incompetent. And it's quite staggering that a country with such a large advantage would lose a conventional war. Okay, a superpower could even lose an unconventional war, asymmetric warfare, but this is largely a conventional war, fixed set piece battles, fighting against fixed defensive positions and so on. So it's been going on very badly because it's how many is it? 31 days now. It's been going on, and they still haven't even enveloped Kiev, and indeed are being driven back from some of the suburbs of Kiev. They've not even taken Kharkiv, which is only 20 miles from the Russian frontier. They have taken a few other cities like Kherson, and Mariupol gallantly battles on, though it is surrounded, and I don't know how those people are doing it. There's been obviously plenty of bad news for Russia. So Russia, they recently released another death toll. I think they said that they've lost 1,300 soldiers killed, obviously more wounded, few captured. But there was something published in a Russian newspaper a few days ago saying that they'd sustained almost 10,000 deaths and just over 16,000 wounded. And that was taken down very quickly, saying that that was a hoax, that someone put that up. But that would seem to be about right, in line with NATO estimates. No, I haven't seen that website you referenced. There's a rumor coming out that the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu has died. That's unconfirmed. That could be a lie. I just don't know. I mean, I think the war's going to go on for another couple of months at least. I thought it was going to go on for about 6 weeks initially, but then I obviously revised that estimate. I thought Kiev was going to fall a long time ago, but the fighting spirit of the Ukrainians has exceeded really everyone's expectations, maybe even their own. Certainly, Putin gravely underestimated the ferocity of the resistance he was going to meet, and overestimated the capability of his soldiers. So Shoigu, his defense minister, wasn't seen in public for about 10 days. Rumours were swirling about that. Shoigu certainly hasn't covered himself in glory. And yes, I know that he's popped up on television now, although we're not certain that's a contemporary broadcast. That could have been library pictures, that could have been from weeks ago, months ago. And there's incidentally a rumour that Vladimir Zhirinovsky has died, if not is gravely ill. That ultra-nationalist politician, leader of the extraordinarily inappositely named Liberal Democratic Party of Russia. So the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that the first phase of this operation is over, switching to the second phase. Well, why? Because they've not managed to form a sort of land corridor linking like Luhansk to Crimea, which they wanted to do. The rock in the road there is Mariupol. They've not managed to take Kiev, as I said, or even envelop it, or even take major cities, and they've not inflicted even that many losses on the Ukrainian armed forces. I mean, the 200,000 Russian troops that Russia dispatched into Ukraine, well, it's the lowest estimate of losses is 10% of those killed, wounded, or captured. I wonder if some have deserted as well. There's been no large-scale desertions or mutinies, or any mutinies so far as I know. There is a rumour that one general was deliberately run over by his own men. So I think it's 6 Russian generals have been killed. Now the Russians, I mean, haven't admitted to this, but then again, they've not actually disputed it. So, and that is telling that they're leading from the front. One might actually reflect credit on them. But they say one of the many problems of the Russian army is the NCOs, even the junior officers, are given no initiative because they overemphasize obedience and they can't react quickly to things. Yes, I mean, Putin, will he do something drastic now that he's backed into corner? Just possibly. I'm a bit surprised he hasn't already used chemical, biological and nuclear weapons. Maybe deterrence is finally working. Before this war, he was warned of ruinous, swinging sanctions if he invaded Ukraine. But he was heedless of that warning. He was warned that Ukraine had been quite well armed. Again, he disregarded that. Perhaps he believed the assurances of his military top brass, who said, "This'll be a cinch. It'll be a walkover for us." And they were dead wrong about that. It was not the protracted victory parade that he was led to believe. And obviously, his soldiers are zombified, bamboozled, often malnourished, running out of fuel and everything like that. They were told that they would be welcomed with open arms, they'd be garlanded. Well, the Ukrainians give them a very warm welcome, but not the kind you would wish to receive. Ukraine has given Russia an answer from the barrels of her guns. Anyway, So so many Russians have been sent home in coffins, and there's this carefully choreographed media campaign in Russia to convince people everything is going according to plan, but patently that's not the case. And it's thought that Russia actually just doesn't have the force to take Kiev on the ground. And by pummeling these cities and destroying every single building, in a way they make it more difficult for themselves because there's so much rubble, it's then impassable to their vehicles, and people might still be able to live in their bunkers and stuff like that. So a lot of food is being sent in, and the Russian military hasn't actually done some of the very basic things. Like that railway line from Kiev to the west, they haven't taken it or just blown it up so that trains can't be taking refugees out, munitions, food, and everything else in. I think the Ukraine is obviously messed up as well. You know, not that I'm a soldier, never have been, but speaking to some military friends, by not blowing up those bridges very quickly. I mean, Russia could be 2 weeks behind where they are now had they done that. So they're going forward at a snail's pace, the Russian military. And as I say, in some places have been driven back. I'm surprised the Ukrainians haven't made more of an effort to relieve Mariupol. Now the Russian Ministry of Defense say, well, the priority is to liberate, as they call it, the rest of the Donbass region, the very east of the country. And one of the reasons they were so cocksure about this is obviously seizing Crimea in 2014 went very well. But that's because it was something very small they were seizing, and they knew that region at the back of their hand. The Russian military was allowed to be in Crimea anyway. They're welcomed by about 80% of the population. They sent Spetsnaz, the most highly trained troops. So these crack troops, they seized it very quickly. It was almost bloodless. Most of the Ukrainian Navy came over to their side. So that was a triumph, and they're using a masquerade, using disinformation. That worked very well. But I mean, the rest of Ukraine is about 20 times bigger than Crimea in area, and most of the population were fiercely hostile. And because of this fearsome resistance, it hasn't worked. And their supply lines are too stretched, and the logistics are really not working. So their commissariat's pretty dreadful. And they say that the obviously soldiers are so badly paid, and sometimes their food is out of date. They're stealing and selling fuel just to get food. Now, I don't know on what scale that happens. If it's just one soldier out of 200,000, obviously it's just nothing, doesn't count. But if it's a significant scale, that partly explains it. Or is it to avoid getting killed? Are they deliberately vandalizing their own vehicles, sabotaging things, pouring away the fuel soap? Oh, well, unlucky us, we're stuck miles away from danger. We'll just have to wait here till we get more fuel supplied. Anyway, and NATO has been united by this. They've stepped up to the plate to some extent, provided weapons. I think they could have done much more, and so on. So why has Putin not actually resorted to a weapons of mass destruction attack already? Maybe he's been warned he better not do this. Maybe finally NATO's convinced him, no, if you do that, we'll respond in a really severe way. Yeah, Putin doesn't want to see division within the Slavic people where it already exists, unity through conquest, where there is division between the Slavic people. Go back to before Putin. In the 90s, when Yeltsin was in charge, Ukraine and Russia had very cordial relations. There was no aggro. As Putin came along, and that all changed. Remember before 2004, trying to murder Lukashenko and so forth, and just wouldn't tolerate them trying to join the European Union. If he was willing to have real democracy in Russia, maybe Russia would have been allowed to join the European Union one day. There was even talk, would Russia be allowed to join NATO in the mid-90s? Russia has scaled back its operations, maybe being a bit more sensible, that they cannot attack on a few fronts, which might seem to be advantageous to them because Ukraine couldn't defend from 3 directions, and maybe Russia would just concentrate on one area, and also it's the furthest bit from the NATO border, hardest for the NATO-supplied weapons to get there, and there are more people who are pro-Russian in the Donetsk region, so that might actually work for them. But there have been swinging sanctions on Russia. Their economy is created. It's wiped at least 12% off their economy. They had 2% inflation in a week. That's what they'll admit to, probably higher than that. That's what you'd expect to have in a year, 2% inflation, and on and on. And so, their airlines are going to go bust. Most of their planes, at least, they could be seized if they go abroad. They're not going to get the microchips they need, transponders, loads of things they can't get. But on the other hand, it could be a chance for import substitution to make their own things. If you can't go to McDonald's, Russia set up its own fast food chain, stuff like that. Russia's, to keep food prices down, they're no longer exporting certain foods. Okay, that's good in a way. On the other hand, then you have earning less foreign exchange. It's pushing the European Union even faster towards renewable energy. On the other hand, you can't go that fast. The United States signed a big deal to supply natural gas to the European Union. Qatar is going to supply more to Germany, and so on. The European Union would lose out on 30% of its energy if it cut off Russian energy purchases totally. They could make that up by partly buying it elsewhere, partly making more renewable energy, and partly reducing energy usage. Put on a jumper at home in the winter, turn down the heating, have a smaller car, drive not so far, don't fly so much, just don't buy so many things we don't actually need. Anyway, and China's not been very helpful to Russia like they were hoping. It's not given the financial support they want. I don't think the Chinese will skin them to the bone. They always drive a very hard bargain. But anyway, there doesn't seem to be a complete rethink in Russia. The one thing that would end all this is total withdrawal. But Putin thinks he's gambled very heavily on this. In a sense, it is an existential threat to his regime, not Ukraine, but his own failure, because he's invested in this emotionally, his prestige, and that's why he's got to double down on it. Because if this is seen as a defeat, that could be the end for him. Would he even be pushed out by some of his camarilla? Just possibly. Could there be just mass protests to bring him down? He's got to have something to show for all the sacrifice. The almost $1 trillion worth of economic damage he's sustained, and the several thousand Russian troops who've been killed. There have already been some prisoner exchanges. So much equipment lost. I mean, tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, but also one of these communications trucks, which is used to jam enemy communications and radar, and that's fallen into the hands of the Ukrainians, who've given it to NATO, and that is the crown jewels, because then NATO can learn to develop countermeasures on that one. So these have been some very serious losses. And I'm sure the CIA is all over there. A few of the senior Russian officers who've been captured, been interrogating them, pumping them for information, may well have proved to be a mine of information. But of course, they could be given a lead injection if they're repatriated. So presumably they might apply for asylum in the West. So it's been calamitous for Russia. Obviously, it's it's taken a very heavy toll on Ukraine as well. Several thousand of their soldiers have been killed too. And of course, Ukraine's got a much smaller population. Up to 4 million refugees have fled, and obviously about 4 million internally displaced people in Ukraine. It's going to take years to rebuild this. Boris Johnson saying that the European Football Championship 2028 should be held in Ukraine instead. Well, there's an awful lot of reconstruction to do, and I'm sure Russia won't get any of that work. The one thing they can get out of this, Russia, is they can force Ukraine to unite with them. Not Ukraine, sorry, Belarus, because Belarus is more dependent on them than ever. Okay, thank you so much for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe. Donate to me on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Bye.